more than 100 people died trying to find one man in the Amazon. In 1925, Colonel Percy Fawcett, a veteran surveyor for the Royal Geographical Society, walked into the Brazilian jungle, convinced a lost civilization lay hidden in the Upper Xingu. He never came back. 13 rescue expeditions followed. None solved the mystery. For nearly a century, the official record held that Fawcett died chasing a fantasy. Then scientists fired LiDAR through the Canopy over the exact region where he vanished and found what should not exist: a vast network of pre-Columbian cities with roads, plazas, and engineered landscapes spanning thousands of square kilometers. Fawcett was right, but who built those cities? Changes everything he believed. In 1753, deep in the Brazilian interior, a Portuguese Bandeirante expedition recorded a discovery that would haunt explorers for generations. Their report, later catalogued as Manuscript 512, described a ruined stone city unlike anything known in South America. The document spoke of arches wide enough for carts, colonnades that echoed the grandeur of ancient Rome, and statues bearing what the author called Greek-style features. Walls and pedestals were said to be inscribed with strange glyphs, neither Portuguese nor any indigenous script the expedition recognized. The original manuscript, 10 unbound pages written in 18th century Portuguese on rag paper, surfaced again in 1839 during a sweeping inventory at the National Library of Rio de Janeiro. It was entered into the library's holdings as Manuscrito 512, accession number 512, and filed among the colonial-era documents from Minas Gerais. No author's name appears on the pages, only the anonymous voice of a captain leading men through the forest, recording what he claimed to see with a mix of awe and disbelief. The language of the manuscript is unmistakably shaped by the classical education of its time. Terms like quadrivium and templum appear alongside vivid descriptions of gold, silver, and a city abandoned to swallows and bats. The author insists the ruins cannot be explained by any living indigenous group, suggesting instead a link to lost Mediterranean civilizations. Swallows nest in the arches, foxes prowl the empty courtyards, but the stones themselves, the writer claims, preserve a secret older than any map. For decades, scholars have approached Manuscript 512 with skepticism. No other 18th century Portuguese records mention a stone city of such scale in the Amazon, and the Greco-Roman motifs described seem more at home in European adventure literature than in colonial field journals. Modern archaeologists note that the region holds earthworks and petroglyphs, but nothing matching the monumental stonework of the manuscript. Some suggest the text is a blend of Bandeirante rumor and 19th century romantic imagination, amplified by the era's hunger for tales of lost worlds. Yet the document's provenance remains beyond dispute. Its physical pages reside in the National Library, catalogued and digitized, a puzzle preserved in ink and paper. For those who read it, explorers, dreamers, and skeptics alike, the manuscript offers both a tantalizing clue and a warning. Not all that is written in the archives can be trusted, but some stories refuse to fade, no matter how many times they are questioned. Percy Harrison Fawcett entered the world in 1867 in the seaside town of Torquay, a place far removed from the tangled frontiers that would later define his life. The son of a British Army officer, he inherited both a restlessness and a taste for discipline. Military training at the Royal Military Academy Woolwich led him into the Royal Engineers, where he learned the exacting arts of surveying, map-making, and survival under pressure. These were not the skills of a dreamer, but of a man who trusted in measurement and record, who could calculate longitude by the stars and chart a river's course with a theodolite and a single sheet of foolscap. By 1906, Fawcett had become a fixture at the Royal Geographical Society in London, a clubby institution whose walls were lined with the portraits of men who had mapped the blank spaces of the globe. The society dispatched him to South America on a series of assignments that would stretch over nearly 2 decades. Between 1906 and 1924, Fawcett mapped the borderlands of Brazil, Bolivia, and Peru, often working alone or with a skeleton crew, traversing the Mato Grosso and the Upper Xingu. His field reports, dry, precise, and unfailingly detailed, earned him medals and the respect of fellow explorers. In the Society's reading room, Fawcett pored over colonial archives, indigenous oral histories, and the cryptic notes of earlier Bandeirante expeditions. It was in Rio de Janeiro, during a spell of archival research, that Fawcett encountered a copy of Manuscript 512. The document, with its tales of arches, statues, and lost grandeur, did not strike him as mere fantasy. He treated it as a primary source, a clue as solid as a triangulated bearing. In his correspondence with the Society, Fawcett referred to the manuscript as the Portuguese Report of 1753, a credible pointer, in his mind, to a civilization worthy of serious inquiry. He began to sketch new routes on his maps, aligning the manuscript's vague directions with the half-remembered stories of local guides and the rumors that drifted through the river ports. What hardened Fawcett's conviction was not only the manuscript, but what he found in the field. In the tangled undergrowth of the Upper Xingu, he uncovered fragments of pottery, delicate, painted, and unmistakably ancient, along with polished stone axes and shards of ceramic that seemed out of place in a landscape supposedly untouched by civilization. These discoveries, modest by the standards of European archaeology, became for Fawcett the physical proof that something monumental had once flourished beneath the forest canopy. He wrote of traces of habitation, of roads overgrown but still visible, and of earthworks that defy explanation. The wider world, meanwhile, was caught up in the fever of lost worlds. Fawcett's friendship with Arthur Conan Doyle, creator of Sherlock Holmes, added a cultural shimmer to his quest. Doyle's 1912 novel, The Lost World, drew on Fawcett's Amazonian exploits, transforming the explorer's measured reports into the stuff of popular legend. But where Doyle wove fiction, Fawcett insisted on fact, on the authority of maps, field notes, and the testimony of Manuscript 512. Yet for all his rigor, Fawcett remained a man of his era, shaped by the imperial imagination and the allure of the unknown. He saw in the Amazon not only a challenge to be measured, but a puzzle to be solved, a civilization erased by time, waiting for the right set of eyes and instruments to bring it back into the light. His belief in a lost city was not a leap into fantasy, but a calculated wager that the archives and the earth itself were holding back a secret older than empire. At first light on April 20th, 1925, the river port of Cuiabá stirred with the quiet urgency of departure. Colonel Percy Fawcett, his son Jack, and Jack's friend Raleigh Rymel stepped aboard a battered launch. Their gear reduced to the barest essentials: rifles, a steel-framed tent, a compass, and a few battered crates of food. No porters, no guides, no supply train trailed behind them. The plan was ruthless in its simplicity. 3 men, alone, would vanish into the heart of Brazil's Mato Grosso, following a route that existed only in Fawcett's mind and in the cryptic lines of Manuscript 512. Fawcett's journals from those first days record the rising water and the thick, insect-laden air. The river narrowed as they pushed northwest, leaving behind the last outposts of colonial Brazil. The intended path led through the Mato Grande, a region of tangled gallery forest and shifting floodplain, toward a place Fawcett called Dead Horse Camp, a grim waypoint marked years earlier by the loss of a beloved pack animal. Beyond that lay the Upper Xingu, a territory mapped by rumor and speculation, where Fawcett believed the ruins described in the 1753 manuscript might still stand, hidden beneath the canopy. His obsession was private and absolute. The composition of the party was as stark as the landscape. Percy Fawcett, now in his late 50s, carried the burden of the expedition's hopes and the weight of a lifetime's obsession. Jack Fawcett, just 21, brought the quiet resilience of a son determined to match his father's resolve. Raleigh Rimmel, whose name appears in the Royal Geographical Society's expedition ledger with that precise spelling, was a local rancher and close friend to Jack, chosen for his skill with a rifle and his endurance in the jungle, not for any experience in the arcane science of exploration. 3 men, no backup, no possibility of rescue once the last steamer faded from view. Fawcett's decision to travel light was no accident. He distrusted large expeditions, convinced that the presence of outsiders, especially porters and interpreters, would only draw the attention of hostile tribes or alert rival explorers. The minimal support structure was a calculated risk, one that left the party exposed to every hazard the Amazon could conjure: disease, hunger, isolation, and the slow, grinding attrition of the forest itself. Letters written in the first week speak of rationed biscuits, swarms of biting insects, and the oppressive sense of distance from the world they had left behind. Each day carried them farther from the reach of civilization. By the time they reached the confluence of the Javari and Cuyaba rivers, the expedition had already begun to shrink in the imagination of those who followed its progress. The trio pressed on, their route marked only by the occasional abandoned camp or the distant echo of indigenous drums. There would be no telegraph wires, no supply drops, no second chances. The isolation was total, the stakes absolute. Every mile upriver was a mile deeper into the unknown. It was a place where maps ended and the great unanswered questions of the Amazon began. On May 29, 1925, a battered envelope arrived at the Royal Geographical Society in London, bearing the last words anyone would ever receive from Colonel Percy Fawcett. Written from Dead Horse Camp, deep in the Mato Grosso, the letter now rests in the Society's archives, a single fragile thread connecting the world outside to 3 men vanishing into myth. The handwriting is steady, the tone almost buoyant. Fawcett reports that the expedition is making good progress. He mentions the richness of the land, the promise of pottery fragments and signs of a lost civilization. Jack and Raleigh Rimmel are in good health, he assures, and the supplies are holding. There is no hint of desperation, only a quiet confidence that the city he has chased for decades lies just ahead. He promises to write again soon. For Fawcett's wife and for the Society's officials, the letter was a lifeline, a sign that the plan, however audacious, remained intact. In the days that followed, they waited for another message, a second telegram, or a coded note from further upriver. But nothing came. The radio channel fell silent. Weeks passed, then months. The optimism that colored Fawcett's last words gave way to a slow, creeping dread. In the archive, the letter stands as a monument to hope suspended in time, a final dispatch from the edge of the known world before the jungle closed its doors for good. 13 rescue missions launched into the Amazon after Fawcett's silence, each driven by hope and haunted by the growing certainty of loss. The first official search began before the year ended, led by seasoned explorers and desperate relatives, but the jungle offered no answers. Each new expedition followed the same uncertain trail up the Cuyaba, across the swollen floodplains, to the tangled green where maps turned blank. The stakes grew with every attempt. More than 100 people died in the effort to bring Fawcett home. Their names rarely made headlines, but their fates are recorded in the archives, lost to malaria, swept away by rivers in flood, or vanished after hostile encounters with tribes defending their land from outsiders. Albert de Winton, a veteran journalist, set out with his own party in 1926. Weeks later, he was found by indigenous villagers, delirious and barely alive. His companions gone. Peter Fleming, brother of the future Jane Baumeister's Bond creator, led a Canadian-sponsored search the following year. His expedition ended with men stricken by fever and forced to retreat, the jungle claiming another tally in its silent ledger. Others were less fortunate, succumbing to snakebite, drowning in hidden currents, or simply disappearing without trace. The hazards were relentless. Disease struck down even the most prepared. Boats capsized in sudden storms. The forest, indifferent to human ambition, erased footprints within hours. For every would-be rescuer who returned, many more did not. The cost was not just measured in bodies, but in families left waiting, in unanswered telegrams, and in the slow, grinding realization that the search for Fawcett had become a tragedy of its own. The myth of heroism dissolved in the face of such loss, replaced by a sobering arithmetic. 13 missions, 100 lives, and not a single trace recovered. The Amazon, it seemed, demanded payment for every secret it kept. On February 15, 1927, the Royal Geographical Society gathered at Burlington House to confront the unsparing arithmetic of the Amazon. After nearly 2 years of silence, the committee reviewed every telegram, every field report, and the last letter from Dead Horse Camp. With no further word from Colonel Fawcett, his son Jack, or Raleigh Raimel, the Society entered a formal resolution, and the expedition was declared lost for the official record. The language in the minutes is precise, neither resigned nor sensational. Notices were filed with the Council and the Royal Society of London. A memorial entry appeared in the Geographical Journal, listing the coordinates of the last known camp and summarizing the vanished trail. Mrs. Fawcett received the Murchison Grant in recognition of her husband's service to geographical knowledge, while the Society's library catalogued every field note and map under a new heading: Fawcett, Percy, Lost Expedition from 1925 to 1927. The verdict closed the file, but not the questions. By the summer of 1925, the fate of Colonel Fawcett had become a global obsession. Newspapers from London to New York splashed his name across front pages, each headline more breathless than the last. The Daily Mail, with its circulation of over 1 million, ran banner stories headlined "Fawcett Missing." The Times, the New York Times, and the Chicago Tribune each devoted entire columns to the unfolding drama. In Paris, Le Figaro printed his portrait beneath the stark headline, "Disparition du Colonel Fawcett." Circulation records from that year tally the reach at nearly 40 million readers, an audience unprecedented for an exploration story. But the press did more than inform. It fueled a frenzy. The public did not simply watch. They wrote in, speculated, demanded updates, and devoured every rumor. Letters flooded editorial offices by the thousands. The BBC adapted the saga for radio, while serialized fiction in the Strand magazine borrowed the explorer's name for tales of vanished cities and jungle peril. Political debates in the British Parliament cited the case as a matter of national concern, underscoring just how deeply the disappearance had gripped the collective imagination. This was not passive consumption. The world's readers became actors in the legend, their appetite for news transforming a missing explorer into a mythic figure. The story repeated itself in every language, across every continent. Fawcett's quest no longer belonged to the archives or even to the Amazon. It belonged to the mass media and to the millions who refused to let the mystery die. In 1992, Michael Heckenberger, an anthropologist from the University of Florida, arrived in the Upper Xingu with a question that had haunted outsiders for centuries. What traces of ancient society might still be hidden beneath the Amazon's dense green veil? Unlike the explorers before him, Heckenberger did not come alone or impose his own narrative. From the beginning, he worked in close partnership with the Kuikuro, one of the indigenous peoples whose lands stretch across the headwaters of the Xingu. The collaboration was not a formality. For Heckenberger, the Kuikuro were not merely informants or guides. They were the primary interpreters of their own history, and their knowledge shaped every step of the investigation. The method was patient, almost old-fashioned in its rigor. Heckenberger spent months at a time in Kuikuro villages, learning language, kinship ties, and the rhythms of daily life. Fieldwork was conducted side by side. Kuikuro elders directed the team to overgrown mounds, explained the meaning of earthworks, and recounted oral histories that had been passed down for generations. Archaeological surveys were mapped with input from local residents, who pointed out the outlines of ancient roads, the remnants of garden plots, and the subtle traces of past settlements that outsiders would have missed. From this partnership emerged a picture that defied the conventional wisdom of the time. The Upper Xingu, long dismissed as a wilderness punctuated by scattered villages, revealed itself as a landscape of engineered complexity. The Kuikuro did not just remember the past, they lived amid its remains, tending orchards planted by ancestors, fishing in ponds dug centuries before, and walking the raised roads that once connected a network of towns. The archaeological record, interpreted through Kuikuro knowledge, showed plazas, defensive ditches, and settlement clusters on a scale that matched or exceeded anything described in colonial manuscripts. Heckenberger's commitment to ethnographic collaboration set a new standard for Amazonian research. Scientific credibility was no longer built on the outsider's authority alone, but on the shared expertise of those whose ancestors shaped the land. In the process, the search for lost cities shifted from a solitary quest to a collective act of remembering, with the Kuikuro at the center of the story, not its margins. Kuhikugu does not announce itself with towering stone or marble columns. Its presence is written into the land itself, across a sweep of the Upper Xingu that stretches for nearly 20,000 square kilometers. Here, the forest conceals the outlines of 20 towns, each one linked to its neighbors by broad, straight wounds, some as wide as 50 meters, wide enough to swallow a modern highway whole. These roads do not meander. They cut through the landscape with a precision that betrays careful planning, joining settlements in a web that once tied thousands of people together. Population estimates for this ancient network range from 30 to 50,000. That figure stands in stark contrast to the old orthodoxy, which insisted that the Amazon could support only scattered bands of foragers. Instead, the evidence from Kuhikugu points to a society capable of sustaining numbers on par with the great cities of the medieval world. Each town is organized around a central plaza, typically about 150 meters across, an expanse that could hold hundreds of people for ceremonies, councils, or feasts. The plazas are not haphazard clearings. They are geometric, often circular or rectangular, ringed with the remains of communal houses and ritual posts. Defensive ditches and earthen walls surround many of these settlements, their outlines still visible in the raised berms that ripple through the undergrowth. These fortifications hint at a world where conflict and cooperation went hand in hand, a society skilled at both building and protecting what it had built. Beyond the town centers, the landscape reveals an even deeper layer of design. Orchards of Piki and Brazil nut trees, still productive after centuries, mark the sites of managed gardens. Fish ponds, engineered basins dug into the floodplain, dot the region, their shapes regular, and their banks reinforced. These are not casual features. They are the infrastructure of a people who understood how to coax abundance from a challenging environment. The soil itself carries the imprint of this long habitation. Layers of Terra, Preta, a dark earth rich in charcoal, bone, and organic debris, show that the inhabitants of Kuhikugu deliberately transformed the ground beneath their feet. This was not slash and burn agriculture, but a system designed to endure, to feed large populations year after year. Archaeologists have traced the boundaries of ancient garden plots and mapped the irrigation channels that once watered staple crops. The result is a picture of a landscape as carefully curated as any European estate, but tailored to the rhythms of the Amazon. Every metric, every measurement, 20 towns, 20,000 square kilometers, roads 50 meters wide, plazas 150 meters across, fortifications, orchards, fish farms, lands with the force of accumulated evidence. Kuhikugu was not a single lost city, but a civilization of interconnected settlements, each one a node in a network that flourished for centuries. This is not the fantasy of explorers or the wishful thinking of armchair theorists. It is the record inscribed in earth and forest, waiting for those willing to read it. Airborne LiDAR swept across the upper Jingu, stripping away the forest's camouflage with pulses of invisible light. The scans revealed what decades of machetes and field notebooks could only hint at. A geometric latticework of plazas, roads, and earthworks, their patterns sprawling across the floodplain in deliberate order. Towns, once hidden beneath the canopy, now appeared as luminous fingerprints, circular plazas ringed by ditches, causeways running straight as surveyors' lines, and embankments linking settlements like the avenues of a vanished metropolis. The data did not linger in obscurity. In September 2003, and again in August 2008, the journal Science published Michael Heckenberger's findings. The articles laid out the evidence in terms no peer reviewer could ignore. More than 20 large settlements, each organized around a central plaza, bound together by roads up to 50 meters wide and stretching across nearly 20,000 square kilometers. Defensive ditches and engineered soils, Terra Preta, rich with charcoal and bone, attested to centuries of habitation and agricultural management. The population estimates 30 to 50,000, forced a reckoning with the old orthodoxy that the Amazon could support only scattered, transient bands. To make the scale legible, Heckenberger reached for a comparison that would cut through academic jargon. The road network, he explained, resembled a grid as dense as Manhattan, but radiating outward like the arms of a galaxy. This was not a city in the European sense, but a galactic urbanism, nodes of life and ceremony, linked by engineered arteries, forming a civilization that pulsed across the landscape. Every claim was matched by ground truthing. Test pits, pottery fragments, and soil cores confirmed what the sensors mapped from the sky. The evidentiary loop closed. Remote sensing, archaeological survey, and indigenous memory converged on a single, inescapable conclusion. The Amazon, long dismissed as a green void, bore the imprint of a society whose scale and sophistication had been hidden in plain sight. For the first time, the scientific mainstream was forced to redraw its maps, not with speculation, but with the hard geometry of proof. The Amazon's ancient cities do not rise in stone, nor do they announce themselves with the grandeur of old-world monuments. Their genius lies buried in the soil, literally. Across the upper Jingu, the ground itself tells the story. Centuries before European contact, people here engineered a soil called Terra Preta, dark earth rich with charcoal, bone, and organic waste. This was no accident of nature. Over generations, families transformed the poor, sandy ground into a fertile engine for crops and orchards. creating a foundation for year-round agriculture and permanent settlement. Where outsiders once saw only impenetrable forest, the land had in fact been shaped, tended, and enriched by human hands. But the evidence of civilization runs deeper than the soil. The settlements mapped by Heckenberger and the Kuikuro do not fit the old blueprint of a city, a single dense core crowned by temples or pyramids. Instead, they form a network, plazas, roads, and ditches radiating outward, each town a node in a larger web. This is what archaeologists call Galactic Urbanism, a dispersed city where ceremonial centers and villages are linked by straight, engineered causeways that stretch for miles through the forest. The pattern is deliberate. Plazas serve as the heart of each community, but the real power lies in their connections. Broad avenues, defensive earthworks, and managed landscapes that knit the settlements together into something greater than the sum of its parts. There are no lost marble columns here, no stone arches waiting to be unearthed. Yet the scale is unmistakable. Tens of thousands lived in these towns, thriving on the abundance coaxed from Terra Preta and the forests beyond. The civilization that emerged was not a forgotten outpost of the Mediterranean, but a distinctly Amazonian achievement, one that rewrites what a city can be and who gets to define it. The question that haunted Fawcett's century now stands in sharper relief. Who built the cities beneath the Amazon's green veil? The evidence, once scattered and ambiguous, has settled into a verdict both satisfying and unsettling. Fawcett's instincts about the Upper Xingu were sound. There were in fact complex settlements, plazas, causeways, and fortifications hidden where he searched. The fragments of painted pottery he collected, the earthworks he traced in his journals, all belonged to a civilization that flourished centuries before European contact. But the civilization was not the Greco-Roman fantasy conjured by Manuscript 5 or 12, nor the imagined outpost of lost Mediterranean colonists. The hands that shaped the pots and built the roads were indigenous, ancestors of the Kuikuro, whose descendants still walk those lands today. Pottery shards that once fueled wild speculation about Atlantean origs or Crusader outposts are now catalogued as the work of Kuhikugu's builders. The geometric patterns, the blackened Terra Preta soils, the deliberate urban planning, each detail fits the memory and oral histories of the Kuikuro and their neighbors. The science is unequivocal. These were Amazonian cities, born of local ingenuity, not foreign intervention. Fawcett's vision was both vindicated and refuted in the same breath. He was right about the scale, wrong about the source. The modern reckoning goes further still. In the 21st century, the project called Amazonia Revelada, led by Eduardo Neves, broke with the old model of outsiders mapping indigenous lands from above. When researchers proposed flying LiDAR over the Kuikuro territory, the community refused. Sacred places would not be exposed to strangers, their boundaries not mapped without consent. Instead, Kumesi Kuikuro, a technical geographer and community leader, trained to pilot his own drone. He gathered the LiDAR data himself, ensuring that every digital map, every scan, belonged first and foremost to the people whose ancestors built the cities. The data is not the property of distant universities or foreign governments. It is Kuikuro knowledge, Kuikuro history, reclaimed and protected on their own terms. The twist is as profound as any in the archives. The search for a lost civilization ends not with the discovery of a vanished white city, but with the recognition of indigenous continuity and control. The Amazon's ancient cities are no longer the province of myth or imperial fantasy. They are living evidence, mapped and narrated by the descendants of their builders. Proof that the greatest secret beneath the forest was never lost, only waiting to be seen through the right eyes. Today, satellite eyes and LiDAR reveal a civilization the size of Manhattan beneath the Amazon canopy, with roads, plazas, and Terra Preta soils engineered by ancestors of the Kuikuro. The legend Fawcett chased was real, but its authors were never lost. They endure, mapping their own cities on their own terms. As science finally aligns with Indigenous memory, the Amazon's greatest secret is not what was buried, but who now brings it into the light. Share your thoughts below.